Introduction. Human beings are wonderfully unique, each of us with differing physical and psychological makeups. The way we see the world results from our personal experiences, which explains the concept of different realities. This isn't a pseudo-scientific statement or paranormal idea. Our realities are all different, simply because we all see the world differently. The way one person views poverty, for instance, may be very different from how another does because of how each person grew up. It's these slight differences in perception that make up our realities. If we all see the world differently, then we can also change the way we see the world and, as a result, change our reality. Many challenges in our lives are actually caused by the way we think. Because our thoughts guide our actions, our thoughts also create our lives. While there are events that happen out of our control, the great majority of what happens to you can be boiled down to your own thoughts and actions. This realization gives you the freedom to acknowledge that with some work and an understanding of how your brain functions, you can remodel your life. In considering the techniques presented in this audiobook, it is important for you to release any judgments you might have about certain words. The word programming, for instance, can have a very negative connotation when used in a mental health context. However, by recontextualizing the word, it takes on a different meaning. The techniques presented in this audiobook rely on the assertion that every perception and thought process we form in our brains is a result of subconscious programming, which often results in undesirable life situations. Try to think of it as retraining your brain. If we wish to improve our lives and skills while overcoming challenges, it is vital for us to understand that we are in control of far more than we think. All that is required is for us to grasp this control and learn how to use it to redesign our lives. Chapter 1. NLP Explained. To explain the concept of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, it might be useful to break the term down into its different components. The term neuro refers to the brain and how it helps us to make decisions based on processed information. These decisions ultimately impact our actions. The term linguistic refers to language, and in this context, the language we use to communicate. Programming, of course, involves putting information into a system to achieve a desired result. NLP was first developed in the 1970s by Richard Bandler and John Grinder, who recognized that people who behave and communicate in specific ways tend to get specific results. The idea behind the theory they developed is that if you can identify the methods of communication and behaviors which are faulty in a person, in other words, causing problems in their lives, and you can replace those with methods of communication and behavior which have been identified in people who are successful in that specific area, then you can solve the problem. Bandler and Grinder theorized that people work on their own internal map, which is unique to each person and is built around the information they receive from their senses and experiences. This internal map is the basis of our experiences in life and can also be the root of the challenges we face. This unique internal map is not a new concept, nor is it an unfounded idea. As human beings, the way we see the world is shaped by our experiences from the day we are born. Our brain collects the information we receive throughout our life via our senses and converts it into thought patterns or cognitive biases. If an idea is reinforced in our brain enough, it will become a default setting. Our brains are designed to use as little energy as possible and to facilitate the fastest thought process. Therefore, when the brain begins to recognize a consistently reinforced idea, it will use that neural pathway as its default. It's like your brain choosing to use a highway, which has a higher speed restriction, as opposed to an old farm road that would take longer to navigate. This should be the most effective way for our brain to form thoughts, but often the cognitive biases we form actually produce ineffective thought systems. An example of this would be the confirmation bias. When we develop this bias around any specific subject, our brains will seek out and accept only information that confirms our preconceived belief or perception. This impacts our ability to think critically and can lead us into challenging situations as we are not seeing the world for what it really is, but rather through the filter of our bias. As a very simple example, consider a person who, as a child, was attacked by a dog and badly scarred. They have never worked through that trauma and, instead, they have developed a biased way of thinking in believing all dogs are vicious and dangerous. Such a person will tend to avoid any proof that this is not the case and, instead, will only accept information that proves their bias as true. As a result, they may develop a deep fear or phobia of dogs to the extent that it impacts their daily lives, as they may be too afraid to visit friends or exercise outdoors. In NLP, the practitioner would assess the behaviors and language that this person uses in order to reinforce this bias and slowly replace each with the behaviors and language of a person who does not fear dogs. The example demonstrates quite an obvious challenge in thinking. Many of the biases we hold are deeply seated and obvious only in our subconscious, so it takes a far deeper level of analysis to understand exactly what is causing certain difficulties in our lives. An important area in NLP is to understand which of our senses we are more reliant on. Each person uniquely leans on a different sense to access the bulk of their information. This is called the Preferred Representational System, PRS. Your PRS can often be understood by the way you use words. Here's the link back to linguistics. For instance, if someone often refers to an acknowledgement of information they have received by using the words, "I see what you are saying," then there is a good chance that their PRS is the sense of sight. Another example would be if someone says that they hear you, then their PRS is probably hearing. The reason why this is important to understand is because when we know our PRS, we are then able to use it to restructure our behavior through NLP techniques. We first have to know where we are getting the bulk of our information from before we can change how we process that information. Once an NLP practitioner has established your PRS, they will then start to build a framework for treatment around it. The framework and techniques used by an NLP practitioner will depend on your unique situation and may include some of the following techniques. Visual kinesthetic dissociation. This technique involves removing negative associations which may have formed around a past event. Anchoring. This technique involves using the PRS to actively trigger the senses in order to achieve a desired emotional state. Swish pattern. This technique involves changing behavior patterns in order to achieve desirable outcomes. Rapport. This technique involves the NLP practitioner using empathy in order to understand thought patterns by observing actions. Candola, 2017. Chapter 2. Vision. A surprising application for NLP is in improving vision. The idea behind that is that as human beings, we become so used to having bad eyesight that it becomes more of an ingrained thought pattern than an actual physical disability. Our brain begins to think that the way we see due to poor eyesight is part of our internal language and, therefore, holds on to it and emphasizes it. This is not to say that NLP can completely correct short or farsightedness or astigmatisms, but what it can do is reduce the exasperation of the condition that the brain creates and thereby improve vision to a degree. One of the best examples of how your brain interacts with vision in a less than ideal way is when you are searching for things. Have you ever looked all over the house for your car keys only to find them in a place that you already searched? Usually, you will find that the right place is the one that you wouldn't have expected to see your keys in, such as inside the fridge. Although your vision is seeing the keys when you open the fridge, your brain is denying the possibility that the key could be there, so it is not processing the sight of the keys. When someone else, whose brain works a little differently, looks in the fridge, their brain might allow them to accept the possibility that the keys are in there and they see them. It is this interaction between what your eyes are seeing and what your brain thinks is normal or expected that can worsen our experience of poor eyesight. When we consider the example of not seeing the keys in the fridge, it becomes apparent that much of our sense of sight is subjective and formed when the brain puts together the sight with its own biases to form the picture that we see. It therefore stands to reason that if we are able to harness the way our brain creates the picture, we can change the picture. Proof that much of our poor sight is conditioned and related to our experiences and environment comes when we consider that people living in rural communities with little to no contact with the outside world have almost perfect eyesight. Sight is also a learned ability. Our eyesight actually doesn't develop completely until the age of 8 because we require experiences to pair together with what we see in order to create the pictures in our brain that we term as sight. When your brain is fed information that it has poor eyesight, it captures that information as your new default state, and so, even though your physical condition may improve, you may not be aware of the improvement because of this default mode. NLP techniques to improve vision include several exercises. Any eyesight exercise you do must be done without your glasses or contact lenses in. These sight aids are another trigger for your brain and cause excessive reliance on the aids by magnifying their need and efficacy. The Tibetan eye chart is one such method that can be practiced in the comfort of your own home in order to train your brain's link with vision. Tack the chart to a wall in your home at eye level and stand at the furthest point where you can still clearly see the detail of the chart. Start on the outside of the chart and let your eyes follow each level, clockwise in a circular motion, until you reach your starting point again. Then move slowly closer and repeat the process. This exercise should be done at least twice per day. An excellent exercise for relaxing tired eye muscles and improving vision is a simple visualization exercise. Sit comfortably in a chair with your feet flat on the ground. Close your eyes and rub your palms together vigorously. Now cover your eyes with your cupped hands, keeping your eyes closed. Focus on what it would look like if you were looking at black velvet material. In your mind's eye, picture the texture and various colors that make up the material. Do this for several minutes at a time. Chapter 3: Critical Thinking, Problem Solving, and Decision Making. These 3 elements of the cognitive process are perhaps the most important in shaping our lives. The way in which we think, our capacity for solving problems, and our ability to make decisions can all be impacted by the way our brains have already been trained to think, albeit subconsciously. NLP can therefore aid in changing the biases that cause us to have difficulties in these areas. Critical thinking. Critical thinking is a manner of thinking that avoids accepting information at face value and encourages questioning, research, and deep understanding. It helps us to work around our existing cognitive biases by ensuring that information that we are accepting as true has been filtered through our conscious brain and not simply absorbed because it matched our preconceptions. As previously explained, your brain will always take the fastest route to a thought formation, and your biases are the fastest routes. They are, however, not always the correct or most informed route. A relevant example would be the emergence of the fake news phenomenon on social media. The reason that fake news continues to be shared and does the damage in all arenas that it does is because of a lack of critical thinking. One of the best ways to describe critical thinking is that we can acknowledge that the color white exists and we can acknowledge that the color black exists, but we also have to investigate all of the shades that exist between those two colors. The idea of only having 2 choices is referred to as dichotomous thinking, and this is one of the thought patterns that NLP seeks to retrain. When you are presented with a piece of information that appears to only give you two options, alarm bells should go off in your head to signal that some critical thinking is required. Problem solving. Problem solving is a cognitive process and, as such, it is impacted by the way we have trained our brains to think. We therefore automatically solve problems in a few learned ways and don't often think about new possible solutions. In fact, we quite regularly only focus on the existence of the problem and not necessarily the various methods that we can use to solve the problem. NLP retrains our brains to focus on problem-solving strategies rather than the problem itself. It is important to firstly understand what our unique problem-solving methods are, which ones work and which don't. The language that you use to discuss problems, both internally and with others, can indicate how you tend to solve problems. The initial focus of NLP will be to switch your focus from the problem to the solution. In order to do this, it is important to focus on how you think about problems, including your self-talk about them. Instead of allowing yourself to think, "Why do I always make mistakes?" switch that self-talk to, "How can I solve these problems?" or "What systems can I put in place to avoid this happening again?" The more you do, the more your brain will start to focus on the solution rather than the problem. It is important to consider how our natural fight or flight reaction can impact our problem-solving capabilities. This is an area that NLP focuses on, especially in people who practice avoidance strategies or chronically procrastinate. When faced with a problem, our brain finds it difficult to differentiate between a real life-threatening issue and a problem that simply threatens our ego or emotional stability. It is for this reason that we see fight or flight responses leaking into the problem-solving methods that we use for simple issues. Many people face challenges with aggression, and this stems from the fight reaction being activated incorrectly. In order to use NLP to improve your problem-solving techniques, you must first mindfully observe how you react when you face a challenge. Once you understand what your current method is, then you can work on reframing it. Problem-solving strategies. For instance, if you tend to solve problems through avoidance or procrastination, try to reframe that by breaking a challenge down into small, solvable chunks. Push yourself to work on each of those chunks individually and acknowledge how you feel when you have achieved a resolution. Decision-making. The decisions we make in life directly impact the results we get, so it is vital to ensure that we are using good decision-making strategies and being conscious about the decisions we make. NLP provides a decision-making strategy that incorporates various sensory sources and ensures that you are not only focusing on information from one source. Due to our bias to rely on one sense to qualify information, we can end up making poor decisions because we haven't taken everything into account. The NLP method for decision-making suggests that we need to take in information visually, audibly, and kinesthetically in order to make well-rounded decisions. It is called the VAC method: visual, auditory, kinesthetic. For example, perhaps you are trying to choose between two similarly priced winter coats to purchase, and you are concerned that you may make the wrong choice and regret it later. Use your sense of sight to look at the coats individually, including the care instructions and the quality of the material and stitching. Then use your kinesthetic sense by putting each coat on and feeling how each fits, what happens when you move, and which is more comfortable all around. Then, using your audible sense, speak to a friend, your mom, or the store assistant to get more information that you may have missed. Remember that the words you use to describe each coat are also telling, so be mindful of how you describe each option. After using these three senses to gather information about your decision, you will be in a far better place to decide. A key concept of NLP that helps in decision-making is the idea that no experience is bad. NLP practitioners will always frame an event in terms of what can be taken from it as learned experience. That makes our risk of making a so-called bad decision a little less likely, as no matter what we choose, we will learn something from the result. Chapter 4. Influencing. Understanding how to influence others effectively is a useful skill in many areas of our lives. As a parent, knowing how to influence your children is part of good parenting. In business, understanding ethical influencing techniques is key for success. First, understand others. The basis of improving our level of influence through NLP is empathy and understanding others. Consider how you behave in a conversation when someone else is talking. Are you, like most people, already thinking about your own response while the other person is still talking? If you are doing this, then you are missing out on an excellent opportunity to absorb information that could help you to influence. There is a lot of information to be gleaned about a person's true nature, desires, and needs from both verbal and nonverbal cues. By focusing on these aspects, you can gather clues about the person and adapt your message to suit them. Create rapport. Once you have understood the person that you are attempting to influence, you need to work on creating rapport with them. Rapport is a state in which the other person feels that you have taken the time to understand them and that you have similar views and standpoints. However, NLP tells us that before we build rapport, we need to ensure that we are emotionally stable enough to not take on the other person's energy, especially if their energy at the time is negative. In order to create rapport, you will want to match as much of your own body patterns and behavior to that of the other person as possible. This can include matching their breathing pattern, the verbs they use in speaking, the rate at which they blink their eyes, their posture, and the tone of their voice. Influencing. When creating a situation in which you are able to influence someone, it is important to understand what pushes that person's buttons so that you can mirror the language they use to describe their ideal situation. How you frame your inquiry to get this information will differ depending on the situation. For example, you may be in a job interview and want to influence the interviewer into considering you a suitable candidate. In this scenario, the most important area to influence is whether the interviewer thinks you meet their criteria. The most important criteria to the person interviewing you is not necessarily what is listed in the advertisement for the position. This is where you need to focus on the language that the other person uses to describe the job as well as the ideal candidate. If they don't do this freely, you will need to encourage them to share that information by asking about it. When they answer, listen deeply to the way they phrase their answer, as well as the words they use. Then you can mirror this when you speak. The key to this verbal mirroring is to be subtle about it. If you repeat what someone is saying straight back to them after they've said it, it's going to seem a bit odd. This will take some practice, but using this NLP method involves weaving their phrasing, verb usage, and tone into your own message. Their brain will then pick up that you are using similar language tools to them and instantly create a positive connection. Profiling and admission. Influence comes from profiling the other person to the extent that you understand them better than they understand you. If you reach this stage, you will be able to successfully influence them. In order to understand someone, you need to know where their motivation is, how they express that motivation, who they are, what they really want, and what their values are. When you understand this profile, you are able to conform your own interactions to these criteria. The most powerful statement we will ever hear is one that we have made ourselves, which is why it is so important to have the person that you are trying to influence end up admitting their own need for whatever it is you are trying to influence them into. It has to become their idea, and we do this by simulating their state so that they feel that sense of rapport. When they feel that you share the same viewpoint, they will be more likely to accept your ideas as theirs. When someone feels ownership over an idea, they have already convinced themselves that it is the right thing to do. This is especially important when you are dealing with someone who clearly likes to be in control. Such a person will go out of their way not to agree to do something that they don't want to do, often simply because it was not their idea. So the key is to get such people into a place where they believe that the idea was in fact their own, and they therefore feel that they are retaining control. The key to getting someone to start admitting their need for something is to give them the freedom to say no. That may sound counterintuitive, but when someone feels that they have the freedom to disagree without retribution, they relax their guard. Once they understand that you are supporting their freedom to disagree with you, then you can start to slowly have them raise their own reasons why they would agree if they had to. For instance, you could say, "I am 100% on board with you there. I fully support your opinion. That said, just for interest's sake, if you were to do this, what would be some of the reasons you chose to?" As soon as the person starts listing reasons why they would agree to do something, they are starting to shift their own thought process around it. When they've started admitting some of the reasons why they might do what you're suggesting, you can begin creating a deeper emotional connection to the idea by asking them which of their values agrees with the action. Once the emotional or valued bond of the idea is created, you can then move into what your next step could be. Again, this should be phrased as a hypothetical circumstance. For instance, if we were to look at doing this, what would be the first thing that would need to be in place in order for us to go ahead? Whatever they mention is your first obstacle to overcome. Chapter 5: Productivity and Time Management. The most valuable resource that we have is time. It is the one commodity that we cannot retrieve once it is wasted and the one resource that all others depend upon. Sadly, though, it is also the resource that we most take for granted. NLP hopes to improve your productivity and time management by looking at how you spend your time now and comparing that to how you would like to spend your time. Time management is a misnomer, as it is not so much about managing your time as it is managing how you choose to use your time. Time audit. First, it is vital for us to understand how we are currently spending our time, and you will likely be surprised by the answer. A time audit is required in order for you to truly understand what you are doing with your 24 hours. A time audit needs to be detailed and precise, so much so that you will become annoyed at the detail, but you will be amazed at the outcome. This audit will need to be carried out over a few days, preferably a full working week, Monday to Friday, so that you can get a real overview of how you spend your time. Making a journal that you can carry with you, record every activity you undertake and how long it takes for you. For instance, if you wake up at 6 a.m., record that in your journal. Then if you spend 15 minutes drinking coffee and scrolling through social media, write that down too. Each and every action should be recorded and have a time allocation assigned to it. This may seem extremely laborious, but the effort that you put into this time audit will be paid back in heaps when you are able to restructure your day and reclaim some time. Assess the audit. After 5 full days of auditing your time, sit with your journal and get ready to assess your time usage. First, highlight what you could call essential tasks, such as showering, eating meals, and driving to work. Next, take note of the tasks that helped move you toward your goals. These would include reading books that contribute to your knowledge, working on projects, studying, and networking with people who can help you to achieve your goals. Everything else on your schedule needs to be looked at very carefully in terms of the benefit it brings to you in the short as well as the long term, and whether you can reduce the time you spend on that activity. When assessing your time audit, take note of the times of day when you are more likely to do things that are not conducive to productivity. When you know the hours of the day in which you, as an individual, are more productive, you can work around that to ensure that you get the most out of your time. Determine your priorities. The definition of productivity is different for everyone because everyone's priorities are different. You may want to be able to spend more quality time with your family and help them in their growth, while someone else may feel productive when they are working on their career goals. In order to determine how to be productive, you need to determine what you want to produce and what your priorities are. One of the best ways to determine what your priorities should be is to first picture the end goal. Visualize yourself as you would be when you feel you have achieved your goals. What do you have, feel, and see? Now work your way backwards and determine what actions need to be performed in order to achieve those goals. Those activities should now be prioritized in your schedule. Break these priorities down into a timeline so that you can more easily set about achieving them. Then ensure that you schedule time every day to work on those priorities. Understand your productivity language. We all have things that we procrastinate doing, and your time audit may be a good way of understanding why you procrastinate doing certain activities and how you can change your behavior. Take a look at the periods in which you conducted activities that didn't contribute to your goals. Watching television, playing games on your mobile phone, or aimlessly scrolling through social media. What were you doing immediately before you lapsed into that activity, and what did you end up doing afterwards? Although this will be different for everyone, there is a very good chance that before the time-wasting activity, you were working on something goal-oriented. Perhaps you were distracted or you got to a particularly rough part of the process and you lapsed into the time-wasting activity. It's quite likely that you thought you would be just giving yourself a break and come back to the goal-oriented activity, but did you? Or did you do something completely unrelated to your goals afterwards? This pattern says something about your productivity language. By uncovering it and digging down into it, you will also be able to rewire that language. NLP plan. Use Pomodoros. Distraction is not only a productivity killer, but it actually tires us out. Every time our brain needs to change its focus, we burn glucose as energy. That's why you have those days when you feel completely exhausted, but you can't name a single thing that you have accomplished. The Pomodoro technique, which is used quite commonly by NLP practitioners, is a great way to get yourself into the habit of avoiding distractions. Your time audit will be a good source of information about what distracts you. Once you know whether it is your coworkers, children, social media, or telephone calls that are distracting you, you can implement measures to avoid those distractions. Close your office door and put a sign on the front that reads, "Back in 25 minutes." Take your phone off the hook and switch your data off on your cell phone. Then, pick a task you want to focus on and work only on that task for 25 straight minutes. Then take a 5-minute break and repeat again. This focused 25-minute period is called a Pomodoro session and is a highly effective time management and productivity technique. Hey, it's Maxwell Jensen. As mentioned at the start of this audiobook, you have an exclusive offer available to you for a short period of time. In case you forgot to claim your 100% free, no strings attached Ultimate Mindset course by Intelligence Mastery, please can you make sure to do so now? The reason for this is in the next coming chapters, I will be discussing and referring back to parts of the course that Intelligence Mastery has created for you to improve your mindset. It will be pivotal to have this course available at all times, as when learning about self-improvement strategies, the Ultimate Mindset course will guide you to implement these strategies in a quick and effective manner. In case you forgot how to claim your free copy of the Ultimate Mindset course, search in your search browser's URL free.intelligencemastery.com. Remember, before listening any further, please do this now, as I will refer back to parts of the course throughout this audiobook. Chapter 6. Persuasion. The NLP techniques for persuasion are very similar to those we discussed under influence. In order to persuade, it is necessary to influence. Persuasion requires your language to convey certainty and confidence. Certain generations have developed a lilt in their speech, which is usually applied to the last word of a sentence and makes everything they say sound more like a question than a statement. If you speak this way, you will not be able to achieve persuasion through NLP, as the person that you are communicating with will continuously be questioning whether you are being sincere. A well-used NLP technique for persuasion is the embedded command. This occurs when you phrase a question as an instruction, providing less leeway for the other person to decline. An example of this would be asking a client how many of a certain product they would like to purchase rather than asking them whether they would like to purchase the product. The latter phrasing leaves them open to accept or decline, whereas the former phrasing makes it more difficult to decline. Another technique which is useful in persuading is limiting the choices you offer. Instead of asking a customer whether they would like to purchase a product, you could, instead, ask whether they would like the product in green or red. If you are trying to convince someone to go on a date with you, you could try asking whether they would like to go for coffee or to a movie. In this way, the person feels less able to decline completely as you actually haven't given them that option. Parents of young children often instinctively use this method, especially when it's mealtime or bedtime. Instead of saying, "It's time for bed," which is likely to result in several complaints and negotiations, the parent will ask, "Would you like to put your pajamas on first, or would you like a bedtime story first?" Parents will also agree that this doesn't work every time, but it certainly has a high hit rate in minimizing refusals, because you are empowering the child with a choice. The "I could, but I would rather not" technique is another NLP method that you probably use a lot without knowing it. The idea is to state the thing that you don't want to do, but phrase it by using language that encourages the other person to jump in and offer to do it. An example of this would be, "I could pick up bread and milk on my way home this afternoon if you want me to." When this phrase is spoken, you will apply a lilt to the last few words, indicating that you are asking a question rather than actually making an offer. Another example can be, "I can make dinner tonight." When emphasizing "tonight," you open the opportunity for the other person to offer to cook the following night. There is a three-letter word that is one of the most powerful in NLP persuasion tactics, and that is the word "but." It is human nature to focus on the information provided after the word "but." Our brain automatically sets off an alarm bell when we hear the word and makes us focus on that information. An example of this would be, "Hazel is a very hard worker, but she isn't always on time for work." What did you get from this statement? Most likely, you will have the impression that Hazel is not a punctual person. If we instead say, "Hazel is sometimes late for work, but she is an extremely hard worker," you are far more likely to focus on the fact that Hazel is a hard worker than her occasional punctuality issues. Persuasion is all about bending what someone thinks they want to what you wish for them to want. In order to do this, you need to figure out what they currently think they want. As humans, we are built to more easily share what we don't want instead of what we do want. So when we set out to persuade someone, we have to first get them to admit what desires they currently picture. If someone is only throwing at you what they don't want, such as in terms of an item's price, the best way to get them to start admitting what they do want and break that obsession with price is to say, "Let's say for a minute that the price was not our focus. What would you want your solution to look like and do?" As soon as you ask this question, the person starts to picture a reality with your product in it. The pictures they see in their mind's eye start to link up with the descriptions they give you, and soon they have convinced themselves that they may actually need the product you are talking about. This works really well with family members as well. If you are trying to figure out what your partner feels like eating for dinner and they claim not to know, rephrase your question as, "If you could eat any meal tonight, what would it be?" They will very likely give you at least one suggestion. NLP techniques for persuasion. The aforementioned techniques work well in spoken conversation when the other person has the opportunity to reply. When you are trying to persuade through written communication, your techniques will need to be slightly different. When you are drawing up advertisements, sales copy for a website, or penning a memo in order to encourage staff to behave in a certain way, you may want to incorporate some of the following techniques. Appealing to the values or identity of the person you are trying to persuade can be a powerful way of convincing them to do what you want them to. The specific identity you appeal to will depend on what you are trying to achieve. For instance, if you're selling a new brand of dog shampoo, there is a good chance that your audience will relate to the role of the pet parent and will want to identify with a person who is good at that role. Your advertising could therefore include phrasing such as a responsible pet parent, you know that winter can dry your dog's skin out. This encourages the prospective buyer to identify with the role of being a responsible pet owner and aligns that role with the action of purchasing your product. Another way to appeal to the prospect's identity is by putting a label on their values. For instance, if you need to write a memo in which you will be asking your staff to ensure they use the clocking system when they leave for the day, you will want to appeal to their identity as honest and responsible employees. You could therefore start such a written communication with the words, "As honest and responsible team members of ABC Services, I know that the request that follows will be easy for you to adhere to." You have appealed to their identity, which you have also labeled, and you have given them an action that they need to undertake in order to comply with that identity. In a very similar technique, you can also persuade by using the person's hierarchy of values to bend them to your choice. Everyone has different priorities, but we all have some that are more important than others. Society has its own hierarchy of priorities, which is expected of people. For instance, society expects you to place the welfare of those in your care above everything else, and depending on the product, this will include your children and your pets. So by wording a message to assume this priority, you can persuade a prospective buyer to agree with you. An example of this would be, "We know that you wouldn't put your dog at risk just to save a few dollars." You have made the assumption for them that their dog is a higher priority than a few dollars, and they will find it difficult to go against that hierarchy of priorities. Lou. Chapter 7. Communication, Negotiation, and Presenting. Human communication is a vital act. It is the way we get absolutely everything done. Without communication, society would crumble. There are so many different ways in which we communicate, as well as varied purposes behind it, that we couldn't possibly cover all of them in this book. Instead, we will focus on how NLP can help you with the forms of communication we often find most difficult to master, including negotiation and presenting. Communication. Many of the techniques of NLP revolve around language and how we communicate our reality both to ourselves and to others. Communication often comes so easily to us, pretty much as soon as we have learned to speak, that we take it for granted and do not realize the importance of good communication. Proficient and directed communication is a skill that should be far more highly valued than it is. People who can communicate well have better relationships in all spheres of their lives and are able to build stronger family units. Those with better communication skills also tend to have higher paying jobs and succeed more frequently as entrepreneurs. Leadership skills are also linked to the capability to communicate effectively. Good communication is beneficial in building good self-esteem, as when you feel confident enough to represent yourself verbally, you will feel more sure of your capabilities. When we understand how to communicate effectively, we are able to think more critically and seek out truth in information we receive from the media so that we become more aware. Good communication gives you the ability to participate in activities within society and contribute to social good. Bundrant, 2019. Negotiation. Negotiation as a concept within NLP fits in tightly with persuasion and influence. When you negotiate, you need to have something to offer in exchange for what you want. It's a process of give and take, but when a negotiation goes well, you end up giving far less than you gain. NLP suggests framing every negotiation that you enter into as a collaboration. The minute that someone feels that you are coming in to take something from them, whether it's money or just their point of view, they are very likely to shut down and make things a lot more difficult for you. By framing a negotiation as a space in which you can each air your points and find a middle ground that is suitable for both of you, you remove the possibility for conflict. Ensure that the other person feels empowered by assuring them that you need them and cannot achieve what you want without them. While a negotiation usually involves two parties, the parties should not be the focus. Rather, the joint focus should be on solving the problem. NLP negotiation techniques suggest that you always keep the focus on the broader issue at hand. You are not really negotiating the sale of a product, you are negotiating what the sale would mean. For you, the sale would mean increased access to funds, which would help you to achieve larger goals, and for the other person, the sale may mean the acquisition of a solution which could improve their quality of life. So rather than focusing the negotiation solely on the exchange of money for product, you should also focus on the bigger picture. Another important NLP consideration in negotiation is to leave the auction mentality at the door. An auction is not a negotiation. People blurt their offers out one after the other, and the one with the deepest pockets or lowest aversion to risk wins. When someone places a proposal on the table during a negotiation, do not immediately make a counter-proposal. Not only is this disrespectful to the effort and courage it took them to place that offer on the table, but it shows that you are not there to negotiate. It indicates that you are there to win. Instead, give their proposal the attention it deserves by asking questions and weighing up possibilities. Then, after you have paid due attention to their proposal, you can consider placing a counter-proposal on the table. In order to reduce the amount of conflict in a negotiation, any time that you point out a problem in the other person's proposal, always phrase it as a question rather than an accusation. By asking questions around a point that you find invalid, you can help the other person arrive at the same conclusion as you, and when they do, you've taken some ground in the negotiation. Finally, be aware of blatant intimidation both from you as well as toward you. An obvious sign of someone who is losing ground in a negotiation is that they will start to attempt to intimidate the other party. If you are the intimidator, stop. You are only losing respect from the other party and breaking down any rapport you may have built. If you are on the receiving end of bullying or another intimidation tactic, stand your ground. This is the worst point to relent on anything. So in a calm and polite tone, simply affirm your viewpoint and wait for their reaction. The Plaid Zebra, 2015. Presenting. Good public speaking and presenting skills are useful in many areas. Business is probably the most predominant, but don't discount the importance of simply being able to effectively present any idea and speak to a crowd in day-to-day life. NLP has a few techniques that it recommends to sharpen your presenting and public speaking skills. Use the beginning of any presentation to gain emotional and sensory buy-in from your audience by using the 2-minute story. This can be a personal tale from your past or any recollection or story. But in order for it to be impactful, it must target your audience's senses. When people in the room start to visualize what you are telling them, they start to buy into your story and, as such, they will buy into whatever you say after that story. When structuring a presentation, use as many sensory words as possible. You will have a wide range of people in your audience, and they will have different sensory focuses. The key is to use enough of each type of word that you will target your entire audience. Examples of sensory words include melody, clear, bright, and aroma. You can also use gesturing to create a positive association. When you discuss something positive, be sure to gesture either toward yourself or toward the audience, and when you discuss something negative, be sure to gesture away from both yourself and the audience. When writing your content, be sure to use a good balance between vague words, which are bound to elicit agreement, such as education and excitement, and very specific information. Highly specific information ties into the NLP tool called the meta model, which denotes that people need to absorb specific facts in order to awake their consciousness. The most overridingly successful NLP technique as relates to public speaking is the eliciting of a specific state. Through your words, you can make your audience feel what you want them to feel, and winning over your audience comes down to how you leave them feeling. Use this technique wisely in crafting your presentation to ensure that you leave your audience in the state that you require for your purpose. Schneider, 2016. Chapter 8. Anxiety and Stress Management. Stress and anxiety are two states that we are dealing with more often in recent times. They have serious impacts not just on our emotional state, but also on our physical health. NLP techniques can help us to reduce our anxiety and manage our stress. There are, of course, different types of anxiety and stress. Anxiety can come from a psychologically rooted cause, which is often related to depression, or it can simply pop up out of nowhere and with seemingly no real cause. The latter type of anxiety is often caused by a faulty reaction to our normal human fight or flight reaction. While NLP techniques cannot stop anxiety from developing, they can help to adapt and mitigate it. Meditation. Meditation and mindfulness are concepts that are very closely related. Both are helpful in reducing anxiety. When we experience anxiety, we are not focusing on the present. We are usually obsessing over something that has happened in the past or that may happen in the future. By practicing mindfulness, which helps us to focus on the present moment, we can reduce our focus on anxiety-producing scenarios. Meditation is simply a more concentrated version of mindfulness in which you use either your breath or visualizations to focus your mind and promote relaxation. Grounding. In order to use this technique, you will need to find the set of circumstances that works to relax you. The general idea behind grounding is that you create a scenario that is extremely relaxing to you, and you then use that visualization to associate a sensory trigger that you can control yourself. An example could be visualizing a space that you have always felt connected to in a calming way, and while you think about that place, massage the palm of your hand. If you do this enough and ensure that your visualization is strong enough, you will soon be able to trigger the feeling of calm by massaging your palm. Future-based anxiety. When we consider the type of anxiety that is caused by something in the future, we must first consider that anxiety feels the same from a personal perspective as many positive emotions such as excitement. This acknowledgement can help you to reduce your anxiety by asking yourself if you are really experiencing anxiety about the future, or is it perhaps excitement about something wonderful that is about to happen? By reframing this emotional experience, you can reframe your understanding of its positivity or negativity. Another visualization that can help with future-based anxiety is picturing your timeline as a physical line that you are standing on. Picture yourself standing on the line facing the future and recognizing all the emotions that are on that line with you. Now, step off the line and leave all those emotions behind. You are now in the present and in a space where you simply exist without the pressure of emotions from other times that you cannot control. Schneider, 2019. Reframing stress. Although we have come to view the word stress with a negative connotation, it is important to remember that stress in itself is not a negative thing. It's the way we allow stress to impact us that causes problems. Stress can simply be a motivation to act, rather than a reason to feel fear or anxiety. If we reframe the stress we experience by asking ourselves what we can do in order to turn the situation into a positive, then we also restructure our thoughts and feelings around the situation. This may sound easier said than done, but it really is possible if you section off stress into small goals. Let us use being laid off at work as an example. This is, of course, a rather anxiety-inducing event. You will start to consider how you will earn money, pay your bills, and how long it will take you to find another job. Instead of concerning yourself with all these possible negative outcomes, consider what you can do to use this situation to your benefit. This layoff may result in you getting the job of your dreams, and your entire life may change in a positive way. It could even result in you earning far more money than you were before. In order for these positive outcomes to come true, though, you will need to take action. Taking action while you are experiencing anxiety can be difficult because you may be impacted by the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. If it is the latter, it may be far easier for you to do nothing about the situation and simply stew in your anxiety. That will get you nowhere, and it will certainly not help you to achieve a good outcome from your stressful situation. Start small by pulling out your CV and giving it a quick review. Then, set up profiles on recruiting websites. Step by step, you can start to move yourself toward a positive outcome from a difficult situation. With each achievement, you will feel more in control of the situation, and your anxiety will reduce itself. Chapter 9: Mind Control. This is a rather inflammatory area of NLP, and it is important to understand it entirely before reaching any conclusions about the ethics around it. While you may not ever consider using mind control techniques to scam or psychologically control someone for your gain, there are people in the world who will. It is important for us to understand how these techniques can be used in order to avoid them being used on us. It must also be considered that when you understand these mind control techniques, you could use them on yourself in order to get results that you seek. As long as you are using them for a positive purpose, they can be very powerful and helpful techniques. Our brain absorbs information on both a conscious and subconscious level, and as it is doing so, it is either in an alpha state or a beta state. The beta state, when viewed through an electroencephalogram, EEG, shows high levels of constant activity and electrical impulses. The alpha state is a higher state of consciousness and one that is accessed when we meditate or are in a state of hypnosis. The alpha state is also when we are most susceptible to subliminal suggestions. While many experts will insist that there is no such thing as NLP mind control, the truth depends on which way you look at it. NLP techniques are intended to help bend the mind, your own as well as other people's. So, in essence, this is a form of mind control, but not the sort where you'd be brainwashed into a suicide cult or the like. Any technique that is taught to help sway people in one way or another is a form of mind control. This includes mass marketing, which is imposed upon us by large corporates. Learning NLP techniques does not make one capable of mind control, but there will always be people with nefarious intentions who wish to use such techniques for their own benefits anyway. Subliminal messaging is not a new idea, and it is the very technique that so-called mentalists and some celebrity magicians use to provide entertainment. An example of such a technique could be a color-changing tie on a performer that changes from blue to red. In reality, what is happening is the audience is being fed a subliminal message through the word red, and as such, their brains see a red tie. Several studies have been done on subliminal messages with varying results, depending on a wide variety of factors. The concept of mind control exists on a vast continuum of applications, from drug therapy on one end to cult programming on the other end. We can all control our minds and input messages into our own brains with some effort. When you understand how your brain takes in information through NLP, you will be able to use that sensory method to feed information into your brain that you wish to be there and modify your own behavior from there. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo describes mind control as a process by which individual or collective freedom of choice and action is compromised by agents or agencies that modify or distort perception, motivation, affect, cognition, and/or behavioral outcomes. This definition can clearly be applied to many different situations, and the outcome thereof does not necessarily need to be harmful to the individual. If we look at negative or nefarious forms of mind control, it must be kept in mind that often the methods used are so subtle that the person whose psyche is being impacted will not even know it. The process also happens over a period of time, as the long-term success of the mind control relies on a building up of information in the brain until it becomes the default thought process and overtakes all others. Brainwashing versus mind control. The most important difference between brainwashing and mind control is the knowledge that it is happening. When someone is brainwashed, there is a very good chance that, at least initially, the person is aware of the brainwashing action and knows that the person trying to brainwash them is not on their side. For example, prisoners of war understood that their captors were brainwashing them to use them for their own means, and they also understood that changing their beliefs was a matter of survival. This often occurs in children who grow up in strictly religious communities or women who marry into cultures where they need to rewire their entire belief system. Brainwashing usually involves physical violence or torture in that the acceptance of the required information results in a reduction in torture. Often brainwashing can be reversed once the person leaves the situation. Mind control, on the other hand, is far more subtle and does not involve any violence or physical abuse. The results of mind control can also be positive or negative. When mind control is used in a negative way, by an abusive partner for instance, it can be extremely powerful as it changes beliefs, actions, and even thought systems. This is the reason that people will often say that someone completely changed when they became involved in an abusive relationship. It is extremely important to remember that everyone is susceptible to mind control techniques, and while they will be more effective on some than others, there is no magic bullet that protects you from this type of control. You have to be looking out for the signs and be ready to protect yourself from being controlled for nefarious means. Chapter 10. Self-Discipline. Self-discipline is the ability to make yourself do what you know you should be doing without any outside influence. It is the core of succeeding at most of our efforts in life, as there is very little chance that we, as adults, will be pushed to achieve anything in life if we don't do it right away. Self-discipline is not just about achieving things, though. A lack thereof can impact our health through substance abuse, weight gain, and poor eating or lifestyle habits. NLP addresses self-discipline by looking to change and replace behaviors that lead us to be poorly disciplined. Attempting to address an overriding lack of self-discipline in many areas at once is futile. As with most forms of transformation, it is important to address specific areas to which you can provide ultimate focus. Therefore, the first step in using NLP to improve your self-discipline is picking an area to focus on. This will likely be the area in your life that has caused you the most concern through lack of self-discipline. It may be a relationship, lifestyle-related, work-related, or to do with academic studies. For the purposes of this exercise, let us say that the area we want to focus on is our lack of self-discipline at work. Perhaps you are getting into trouble with your boss for missing deadlines or producing substandard work, and you know that the only reason for it is that you are not being disciplined enough about what you do during your working hours. The first NLP technique to use in this case is to identify the subconscious limiting factors that are preventing you from being self-disciplined at work. Do you enjoy your job, or are you subconsciously trying to sabotage your way out of a situation you don't want to be in? Do you believe that you don't deserve success due to a past trauma? Do you feel unappreciated, or maybe like what you do doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things? Work through these beliefs one by one. Remember that it may take time to restructure your thinking around these beliefs, so be kind and patient with yourself. Once you have recognized and analyzed the self-limiting beliefs that are holding you back, you need to work on realigning your beliefs so that they fit in with your goals. Focus on instances in the past when you have shown great self-discipline and try to understand what was different about that situation and how you achieved your goal then. How can you apply that correct alignment to change your current unbalanced alignment? A base belief in NLP is that our lives match our physical and emotional states. Thankfully, it is possible to change these states and, as a result, change our reality. Consider, therefore, your current physical and emotional state when you feel that you lack self-discipline. What does a lack of self-discipline feel like? What does it look like? When you display a lack of self-discipline, do you feel hopeless, worthless, bored, annoyed, and distracted? What does that look like in your life? Perhaps you take less care in how you look, or maybe your housework is not up to date. This physical manifestation of the emotional state will be different for all of us, and it may take some time for you to understand what your personal language of self-discipline needs to look and feel like, but with some effort, you will get it. Always start small. When attempting to build your self-discipline through NLP, it may be a good idea to start with something that doesn't really have a major impact on your life, but that you know you should be doing, like brushing your dog. Once you have achieved your goal, recognize how you felt when you practiced self-discipline and the words you used to describe it in your mind. That is your self-discipline language. Now, apply that state to larger goals. If need be, break down the large goals into smaller, manageable parts and apply your self-discipline language to each of them. Hey, it's Maxwell Jensen.